we were on the air when it was announced. Correct me if I'm wrong, Martin. When it was announced, though, I think, we were on the air if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
When it was announced that Patrick Mahomes came in 4th place in the NFL 100 list that was voted on by the players. 3rd place was Christian McCaffrey, the running back for the San Francisco 49ers. 2nd place, Lamar Jackson, who won the MVP for the Baltimore Ravens, obviously at quarterback. And 1st place, the wide receiver, the first wide receiver ever to be number 1 since they started this poll in 2011, Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. The focus, though, Patrick Mahomes being 4th. What are your thoughts on that, Martin?
All right. Is Patrick Mahomes the 4th best player in football? No, he is the 1st best player in football. I think most of us can come to agreement with that. Now, him being ranked 4th after last year, though, is not some grave injustice that I feel like I must champion up from on high, right? I understand, your TV partner, he's got every single slight that ever is real or imaginable to Patrick Mahomes. He puts on a board. I get that.
A lot of them coming for a 3-time champion in 6 years, but go ahead.
But this to me is not one. When you
really, it's not a slight.
When you do this voting, right? Rob G told me the voting for the top 100 occurred in the midst of Week 14. Well, if you go back to where Week 14 in your brain, that is the season in which Patrick Mahomes has thrown the most interceptions he had thrown. He hasn't, he barely threw for over 400 yards, 2nd lowest marking yards and 2nd lowest marking touchdowns that he had in his career with 27 and a career high 14 interceptions, right? Was that all on him? No, I won't blame all of that on him, but that still was the resume you were voting against when you look at this. If you go back to the MVP odds in Week 14, Christian McCaffrey, Lamar Jackson, and Tyreek Hill were all in the top 6. Patrick Mahomes was nowhere to be found at that moment in time, right? So when you look at this, to me, it is more of a function of when the voting occurred as opposed to some big slight. Because if they had done it after the Super Bowl, for example, I think that everyone would have had Patrick Mahomes listed as number 1, and he may have been the first unanimous overall number 1 pick. I know how they do these lists. They poll guys, and they have the players that do, they fill out their top 20, right? And then they rank, okay, who got the most first place votes, who got the most second place, and so on to build out the list. There's so many more egregious things on this list than Mahomes being not 1 instead and being 4 that those things have me much more fired up. If he was 8th or 9th, I'd be fired up about that too. But when you look at the 3 guys in front of him and the year they had at the time to the voting, I can't fault. I really can't get too worked up about it.
Well, you said it as far as the timing. It is understandable when you understand, and I don't know that it was Week 14. The article I read in GQ said it was somewhere between Thanksgiving and New Year's. But if you look at the month of December, the Kansas City Chiefs were 2-3. Patrick Mahomes had, I believe, 6 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. And we all know he didn't have his best year for the whole year. He had his worst year of his career. Now, it wasn't a terrible year, but by his standards, it was subpar.
Yep.
It was his worst of the year. And you are right. If you going into December, Tyreek Hill had 7 100-plus yard receiving games. He was averaging 120 receiving yards per game at that point. I think was still on track or close to it of breaking the all-time receiving record and maybe getting 2,000 yards receiving, which has never been done.
Right.
And then in the month of December, Tyreek Hill had December and on. So December and January, Tyreek Hill had 100 or more yard receiving game, period. The rest of the year. So I agree with you. And Lamar and McCaffrey at that point in December, if you will, were looking like the front runners for MVP. So it is understandable. But here's where I want to take this, Martin. Even as we all watched And even as Patrick Mahomes was not having a great year by his standards, and we know a lot of that had to do with, guys dropping footballs. And he had the most drops in the league from his receivers. And Kelsey looked old until the playoffs started. So Kelsey wasn't having a great year either. But even as that was going on, Martin, and even as several quarterbacks were playing better than Mahomes, I still viewed him as the best player in the world, as the best quarterback and best football player, best player in the NFL.
Sure.
And so what I want to ask you, so if I were voting at that time, I still would have had Patrick Mahomes number one. He still at that point had 2 Super Bowls, championships. He still had 2 MVPs. He had done enough where I think most people, not all, but most people, like now, virtually everybody recognizes him as the best quarterback in the world. At that time, I would say 75% of pundits maybe that we see on TV would have had Mahomes number one, and maybe I'm underestimating it.
I think a slight bit, but
you think at
I
that point,
put it like this:
at
that point,
because some people thought Josh or Burrow, not a lot, but
that's the thing. Joe was hurt by that point. I think Josh Allen would have been the only person who you would have found credible sources or TV talking heads throwing in that conversation. Honestly,
okay. So the question I want to ask you is: does the best player, like if he's clearly the best, whether it was a Michael Jordan, a LeBron James, now it's a Patrick Mahomes, do they have to be having the best individual season for you to recognize them as the best? Like most of these guys, I think honestly, 2 to 5 and maybe 2 to 6 is up in the air right now. It could be Lamar. It could be Burrow. I'm talking about quarterbacks.
Sure.
It could be Josh Allen. And maybe, I'm not sure yet, but we'll see. Maybe it could be C.J. Stroud. Right? But that's going to fluctuate year to year. To me, number one ain't fluctuating for the next, I might be being generous and saying 5 years. Or let's say 3 years. I'm being really generous.
I'd lock in 3 for sure.
Let's say 3 for sure. And so that's what I want to ask you. Like LeBron didn't have to win the championship every year, that he was the best player for us to recognize he's still the best player in the world.
But Chris, during that time period when LeBron James was basically hosting the Eastern Conference Invitational, right, when he was the best player in the NBA and there was all these teams going and bumping their heads against whether it be Cleveland or Miami, as he was going to represent one half of the NBA in the finals for damn near a decade, he didn't win the MVP every year. Right. He didn't, you know what I'm saying? So, no. We can still agree that off the entire track record of your career, where you rank of all time, or, saying where you rank of the whole league may be different than where you rank in individual seasons. Right, we've established this is already true. Tom Brady was the best quarterback for at minimum. At minimum, Tom Brady was the best quarterback for 10 of his 23 years in the NFL.
And he was only first team All-Pro 3 times.
Exactly my point. Exactly my point. We're now, after it was all said and done, did we sit back and be like, oh, man, how did this guy win first-team All-Pro when Tom Brady is this, that, and the third? It's like, no. After a while, these awards, they change, they move around. But this is specifically based off a year-to-year basis.
Yeah, the point you're making, I agree with, and that's why I still think, even at that time, while it's somewhat understandable, I think they should have still had Mahomes number one. And I think it is rather egregious that he's not, because Aaron Rodgers didn't play a snap. Played 4 snaps and was 92. Joe Burrow missed 7 games, and in half of the 10 he played, he didn't play well. And I'm being generous there. It might have been 6 or 7 of the 10 he played, didn't play well. He still was 39th.
But at least with Burrow, you can say he walked into Levi Stadium and beat the 49ers. To me, Aaron Rodgers is egregious.
Well, but what that tells me, Martin, is that it's not just I think that's most of it, what you're doing this season. But it's not just what you're doing this season. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's why to me, of course. I mean, Brock Purdy probably had a better individual season than Mahomes, right? Statistically, he certainly did.
Regular season.
Right. But I still never thought Brock Purdy was better than Patrick Mahomes or really in his class. You see what I'm saying? So I still don't think that's an excuse. I get it. It is somewhat understandable, but I still think even at that time, Mahomes should have been number one.
Yeah, no, but again, having him in the top 5 is still, I can't get Aaron Rodgers being 92 after playing.
92.
We talking about Patrick Mahomes.
You gonna have a hissy fit over 92?
No, but it just shows you. It shows me something that the guy I'm filling in for, Rob Parker, has said for the longest time, and I'm sure you've said it in various ways as well. Current players are oftentimes not the best evaluators of what's going on in the league. They're more focused on what they have going on. They're more focused on beating their opponent on Monday or Thursday or Sunday or whatever. That's what they're focused on, not necessarily a holistic view of the league entirely.
Well, I'm going to be honest, Martin, and I bet you agree with me. Look, if all, and I think they get like 1,000 players at this point, I'm not sure if they only doing the top 20. Are you sure 100 players get named? Maybe, because obviously there's so many different positions,
right? And
players at different positions may be naming, more guys that they face at their position. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I think it's very possible that 100 guys don't get named. That maybe only 74 got named, or fewer than that.
I think it's definitely reasonable to think. But I know this. I was lucky enough to see a submission to this list. Right, when one of the players got a connection, I saw what he put in there, and he had like Justin Matabuke at 7, the defensive tackle for the Ravens. He had Brock Purdy, I think, at 3 at the time.
What?
This is a guy.
Is that Brock Purdy?
Yes.
Whose ballot you saw?
Yes, he had Brock Purdy as
it was Brock's ballot.
No, it wasn't Brock. It wasn't Brock's ballot.
And I like Brock. Y'all know I'm a Brock fan, but
no, it wasn't Brock's ballot. It was a guy who plays in the AFC right now. So I'll just, but that was what I saw at this, and I was like, oh well, these results are ridiculous. Like, okay, Fred Warner at 8, I like it, but like, are we really saying that Brock Purdy's better than Fred? They're all over the place when they're viewing this type of stuff. So, if you looked at his position that he played and then the top 10 list that he compiled, it had an outsized number of players at his position, right? So it's like, all right, well, maybe some of you guys aren't taking this the most seriously. Maybe some of you guys, but I mean, I understand why people would say, how could you not vote Mahomes number 1? But after the year he had last year, I just can't get too worked up about it. But to me, voting Aaron Rodgers as top 100 player last year after 4 plays, it's ridiculous.
I mean, he clearly wasn't last year. And to be honest, you could argue he wasn't even his last year in Green Bay. But I do still think I'm betting going into this season that he's one of the best 100 players in the league. So we will see.